everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm Harvey.
I'm Sebastian.
And we wanted to talk to you a little bit about databases today and when to swipe left on your database. Anyone here familiar with the Tinders of the world? Hopefully swipe left is the right direction. I haven't used it, so maybe swipe right would be more appropriate. I'm not sure. But anyway, so as you may or may not know, databases are very important to Looker and to our architecture. We connect directly to the database, and we have customers that come to us with a lot of questions in terms of what database to choose, when to migrate, when to tune it a little bit better, things like that. So that's why we wanted to have this talk with you and really dig into it a little bit. So we're going to review a little bit about the types of databases, a little overview of data centralization and why we talk about that a lot, and then also when to reevaluate your database and when to kind of reassess, essentially. So types of databases. There are essentially three main types of databases. So you've got your transactional, your analytical, and your unstructured. For the purposes of this conversation, we'll kind of focus in on the transactional and the analytical. So I'll just spend a moment here and dig into actually unstructured. So unstructured is what it is. So it can be a little bit messy. It's an unstructured format. You've got a various conglomeration of files. Those could be text files, PNG, audio, music, video, things like that. The reason why unstructured can be very important is for certain industries or certain types of files. So if you think about an X-ray or an MRI, that's something that would actually be stored in a unstructured database. Oil and gas industry uses unstructured a lot, and a ton of other people. I mean, Hadoop is essentially the poster child for unstructured, and so a lot of people across different industries use Hadoop. Unstructured data tends to actually take up a lot more room. So if you think of like me explaining to you in text a movie trailer or the actual movie trailer, obviously the actual movie trailer is not only a lot more space, but a lot more interesting. All right, moving on to transactional. So almost every single business wants to track their transactional data. So that's anything from the operational components of what's going on in your company, every single transaction that your customers may be passing through your systems. Let's say you are in retail and you want to track every transaction of shoes or something like that. I mean, that's essentially the transactional data that you'll be tracking. Most people also build their applications towards sort of a transactional database. You need to be sure, 100% sure that you're tracking everything. This requires a lot of changes, updates, deletes, things of that nature. The data is highly volatile because you're constantly piping it in. There are small, simple, concise operations that you would run across a transactional database. There's a shared index so that you can actually transverse it very quickly. And it's really all about getting data in. Just give me all the data, put it in this huge bucket, and let me collect it. And the types of databases that we see sort of in that transactional realm can be Postgres, MySQL, Google Spanner is another one, Aurora. There are quite a few. And you need this. Like most companies need some sort of transactional database. But then comes a time when you actually want to do something with that data besides just kind of some transactional, simple, concise pulling of data. And that's when you'll probably focus on analytics. And that moves us into the analytical database. So analytical database, or otherwise known as MPP, which stands for Massively Parallel Processing. So that's the likes of Amazon Redshift, Snowflake, Google BigQuery, Microsoft. So the processors in an MPP database are working in parallel. And they essentially take the big workloads, they break them into chunks so you can run things pretty quickly. They're typically not for use in business critical operations and instead focuses, as the name would would lead you to believe analyzing the data. So you access it in bulk, store all of your data, it can be highly flexible. In this type of database, you're actually accessing your records in the millions. In a transactional database, you're accessing your records more in tens or hundreds. So that's just kind of the difference in scale. In an analytical database, you are focusing on getting the data out as opposed to getting the data in, because you really want to take action on that data, you want to understand what's happening and analyze what's going on in your business. You don't know how you'll traverse the data like you would in a transactional database. So that's just an important metric to watch and to assess as you're stepping through it. So just out of curiosity, how many people in this room have a transactional database? Okay, and how about analytical? Okay, half. How about both? Okay. Pretty typical. So when we are talking to our customers about data centralization, I just wanted to touch on this because a lot of companies ask us, why we sort of talk about or pitch this ethos in terms of data centralization. And there really is some good core knowledge behind that that I think can affect the analytics and affect what you can actually do with all of that data that you're storing. So fundamentally, it comes down to kind of the 3 C's that we talk about: convenience, consistency, and connection. So convenience, it's getting all of that data in one location so that you can actually access it. That gives you governance, that gives you scalability, security. It gives you that single source of truth, which leads me to our second C of consistency. You're consistently dealing with data that is the same across your company. So you're not having multiple people in a meeting that are coming up with different numbers that they've munged out of an Excel spreadsheet. You're actually all looking at the same numbers and therefore making actionable decisions against those that will really affect your business. In centralizing your data, you're actually unifying it and unifying the data meaning and those definitions behind the data, which is really, really important. In terms of actually centralizing your data, that can be an exercise that takes a little work and support. And when we talk about that, we talk about a lot of the ETL partners that we have on the floor here and our consulting partners that are here as well to help you assess how you're going to centralize that data, what needs to be centralized, and how you're going to actually move it from one place to another. So they're great resources to really tap into if you're not centralized right now and you're starting to assess that. Centralization also relieves you of that black box that you may enter into if you decide to do a data dump instead of centralizing your data. Once you enter into the world of doing a data dump, now the data is out of date. There could be different owners of the data, so you're not exactly sure where it's coming from or when you're accessing it, what decisions you're actually making against it. And it also gives you that cross-analytical analysis that you can have. So this is a key metric in terms of really figuring out what's happening. So you have your sales data in Salesforce. You've got your marketing data in, let's say, Google Analytics or something where you're tracking like your website data. And then you've got maybe some financial system of, okay, I've got my traffic on my website, which is leading into the lead funnel in Salesforce, which is passing through to a closed-won opportunity, and then here are the financials. How do you actually make a decision on that and change your marketing on the front end or change how your sales team is actually assessing your opportunities in the middle of the funnel? That's really important, and it's something that's impossible to do unless you have actually everything centralized. So in terms of actually, okay, you've got your database, you've got things centralized, when is it actually a good time to reevaluate what you have in place? And what are some key indicators that could lead you to sort of go out into the market, see what else is out there to move your data to something else? And with that, I will hand that over to Seb.
Thank you. Yeah, so now that we all know about databases, about everything there is to know, it's interesting to think about when should you actually use that knowledge to reevaluate or get someone to help you to reevaluate. I would sort of classify that in two buckets for purpose of this talk. So there's things that might be causing an issue currently. So you have to make a decision how you want to proceed and how do you need to change things up. And then the second bucket would be looking towards the future, right? What are you going to need in a year, 2 years, etc. So to start with current issues, sort of identify a few here. They probably also break down into more options and more discussions to have, but this is kind of a good place to start. So there's things that are happening right now. So do your decision makers or people on the ground, do they have access to the data? Is actually accessing the data to make decision, is that what's slowing them down, right? You don't want to have sort of technology slowing decisions, slowing people. The technology needs to enable them. So that's sort of the first point here. Slow decision, is that an issue for you? Think about that. The second is, when making decisions, are you able to look at data coming from all different sources? Is everything done in silos right now? And so the sort of long tail or complex decision that Megan was telling you about here is actually possible to be done currently in your company. If not, then it might be a good idea to have a look at how can we go and do that. There's a couple more. One is very monetary, so cost alignment. That's about thinking, okay, you have a database now, you have a stack, you're paying for that. Does that line up with the way that your business is growing, right? Is the cost of your data in line with your revenue and profit projections, or are they actually clashing? And if they are clashing, probably want to do something about it before it's too late, right? And the last one is about improving processes, right? So you might be able to make decisions. You might be able to make decisions across different topics based on data coming from a lot of different places. But is there anything else you could be doing with that information? So are people able to sort of improve the way they work if they have access to new data, or if they have access to more data? Now let's say that all of this is working great, no problems there, you're happy with that. The next step sort of moving forward is to think about, okay, if this is working today, what do I need in the future, right? Future needs are all about essentially growth and making sure that you're able to keep doing what you're doing today if it's working well, keep doing that in the future. So there's basically 2 or 3 things that can increase and grow, right? There's the number of users that you have, and that can be both internally, right? Your company is growing, you're hiring more and more people, or it could be externally, you're acquiring more and more customers. And are you providing information to the customers? Are you able to sort of take the scale of that new data into your current processes and keep moving forward? The second one is the data itself, right? So making sure that especially if you have a transactional database, making sure that is this scalable for what you need to achieve and everything you need to record. And then finally, what I'd like to do as a new product, this is sort of what causes the other two to happen, right? If you are thinking about launching a new product, that is either going to need some data, or how did you decide to make that new product? Did you use data to do that? It's either going to produce data that you then will be able to sort of include as a feedback loop into your current setup. And so that's going to cause the data volume to grow, etc. The other thing that can happen with product is the opposite way. You might not be releasing a product, but what if you're actually just acquiring a new tool? That can also start generating a lot of new data, right? If you suddenly are using Google Analytics, that's your example, or if you start using Marketo, or if you start using basically pretty much anything these days, that produces data. Well, you might not, in the first instance, you're buying the product to do for a specific usage, but it will also produce a lot of information that you can use differently to enable the rest of your team or the rest of your company to assess the right things. Now, everything so far has been very, I guess, technical or theoretical. So for the next part, what I wanted to do is actually give you a couple of examples of how this played out in the real world. and hopefully you can relate to those, and we can discuss those into more detail afterwards as well. So both examples are actually two of our customers. One of them, so the first one here, PDX, so they're sort of a healthcare business. They provide software, management software for pharmacies, so that the pharmacies manage their inventory, manage the people that work there, the tills, etc. And they were sort of having different issues, right? They were having, from the scale that they have, so they have 10,000 pharmacies, right? So you can think about 10,000 clients, 10,000 places that are generating data and that need to consume data. That was causing some issues for their analytical needs and even for their clients. So not being able to sort of look at data across multiple pharmacies. That's a problem for them. That's a problem for some of the clients that are chains. Not being able to report properly back to their clients, that the pharmacies don't necessarily know what's happening within their own pharmacies. PDX wants to be able to help them with that, but it wasn't something that was possible. And then thirdly, just the setup that they had on premise was expensive. So it's expensive to run, and if they were trying to go to aggregate the data or centralize the data and then be able to report externally, that was just going to keep growing. At that point, they sort of decide, okay, we have a use case that we want to execute. How can we do that? So they went back to the market, kind of establish, and the decision they made was to move from having all the server and all the database on premise to sort of a cloud-based infrastructure for this use case. And that sort of, it was day and night. So from having silos of data, being able to actually group everything together in a performant and scalable way, now they're able to report back to 10,000 of the pharmacies with personalized analytics. So a pharmacy can run and say, okay, well, these are my top performing employees. What are they doing differently? These are obviously, the medication are running low, we need to restock, etc. But also identify insurance claims that maybe had not been paid by the insurance and actually get money back from that. So that's the value they were delivering to their clients. But PDX themselves, now they're able to be an analytics provider, and that's a new revenue stream for them, right? So by changing their infrastructure, they were able to actually increase their own revenue, as well as make their streamline. There you go. So that's what I was looking for. Sorry, streamline their processes with the data. Typically, cloud offers simpler scalability and higher performance. In this case, that's exactly what these guys needed. Second example, so Blue Apron is a food delivery company, but what they do is to sort of like package a recipe into a box and then just deliver it to your house. You can go and cook that yourself with all the ingredients that you need. And they were being very successful, so they were growing super fast, and that was proving to be challenging from a data standpoint. They were using transactional, so as Megan was saying, that's typically where people start, right? They had an app, they was generating information, they were storing all the transaction in that transactional database, and that was a great place to start. However, at some point, they couldn't scale that anymore, and that's when they started looking at different options. So in this case, they decided to move to an analytical database. The issues they had with the data were sort of, the scale was just unmanageable for a standard transactional database. Queries that people needed to make decisions were taking hours, and they just had to find a way to deal with what they had so they could keep growing. So by moving to an analytical database, just by the fact that it's got parallel processing and different architecture in the way it stores the data, they were able to switch that to be a lot faster, right? So if you look at things that were changing, those queries that were time sensitive, instead of taking 8 hours, they were now taking less than a minute. That's a huge difference. That means that you can have a meeting and take a decision within that meeting. You don't have to say, okay, this is a good point. Let's talk about this tomorrow, because that's just how long it used to take to get the information out, right? So faster decisions are for people, and that's one of the points I was talking about earlier. The other thing that they were able to do is, now that they don't have to sort of focus on scaling so much, they were actually able to take a quarter of all the data engineers and refocus them to other parts of the business. So that's when you can start thinking about, okay, reconsider what are the analytics that we're doing? Can we improve upon that? Is there anything we want to do in the predictive modeling, or is there any work within the app that we need to improve, etc. Right? So sort of without needing to hire new people, you're actually able to get new information, new resources, sorry. And then finally, that goes back to sort of the data, right? So before, where Transactional stored one piece of information, now they were able to store the whole history and do trend analysis, timeline analysis, etc. See how their customers were evolving, why were they leaving, why were they reordering, identify the things that are really important for revenue.
So in the terms of Blue Apron, with them or other customers that we have that are like them, like, have you seen that they move holistically from the transactional to the analytical, or is it that they're taking kind of a subsection of the data that they really want to analyze and utilizing the analytical database for that? Like, how does that balance work?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of you were putting your hand in the air. Most customers, most companies will both have a transactional and analytical database. And the idea is that transactional is going to be great at ensuring that you have all the information you need for actually measuring revenue, for your audits and everything. And analytical is going to contain the part of information that are critical for decision making rather than actual financial reporting. Typically, it's going to be different sources, subset of the transactional information stored in there, and you can do those cross analytics we were talking about. And I think across all the points that we sort of highlighted and discussed, when is it time to reevaluate? There's kind of three parts to highlight if I wanted to summarize this, which are going to be related to these three topics here. The first one is think about volumes, and that's about data volume. It's one thing to be able to store everything. It's another to actually make it accessible to people and accessible to anyone that needs to run analytics. So that's important to be able to do that now and to be able to scale that throughout time. The second one is, as I wrote it down here as concurrency, it's essentially the number of users, right? As you have more and more users are going to be asking the same question at the same time or different questions at the same time. So ensure that whichever architecture or whichever databases you're considering are able to serve you today, but also serve you when your company becomes more and more successful. And then lastly, cost model. Different databases have different ways of charging. And you just want to make sure that it makes sense for your data needs and it makes sense with the way your business is growing and the way you recognize and generate revenue as well. These are really the three things to keep in mind when you decide to reevaluate.
Fantastic. I have another question. When is it time, what is an indicator in terms of query times that you should start, let's say you're running a bunch of queries on transactional and they're starting to take longer and longer the more that you're running or the more that you're hitting the database. When is the breaking point? Because obviously you probably don't want to wait like Blue Apron until you're running 8-hour queries. When is an earlier and better time to kind of look at that?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit subjective, but what's important is that you're able to take decision in the way that's timely for your business, right? Different verticals, different businesses, we run at different speed, but the technology should never be the bottleneck in enabling you to make those decisions and being able to process, run your business properly.
Yeah, get the insights out.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So definitely minutes, not hours.
Perfect.